Hello. Thank you all for coming. Special thanks to friends, family, and of course Professor Visser for supervising me as I created this body of work. Hymnal is a story at its core, and it is my story. It is my story of growing up and becoming myself within religious education and how that shaped me. Next. So when I started creating this work, I was inspired by a number of things as depicted on the screen, though this is only a small handful of the media that has influenced me over the years. However, my biggest inspiration for this body of work was the work of my favorite director, Guillermo del Toro, specifically his work on The Shape of Water. He has this one quote that I think really captures the essence of my show that I wanted to explore. And that is, monsters are patron saints of our blissful imperfections. That quote really stuck with me, and that was what I very deliberately tried to channel when I began working on these monsters. Next. So the first piece I created was Lover. He was made in late August, early September of 2020. And he was largely inspired by The Shape of Water, which is a movie about a woman who falls in love with a fish man. I wanted to create a piece that was a little scary, but also very, very sweet. He stylistically is very different from my other pieces for this show. And I definitely used him as more of a jumping off point for the work that I would create down the line. In terms of a narrative, I consider him a prologue for the things to come. Next. So the first true narrative beat of this story is Absolution. Absolution depicts a character I created in high school that I did a series of drawings about, which discussed my struggles with mental health. Unfortunately, my work was not allowed to be shown because my school believed that my pieces were simply too dark to be displayed. So creating this character for this show felt like I was finally getting to show them in a way that meant something. Some added notes are the noose around their neck symbolizes a toxic relationship I experienced in high school, and the charm is a leftover reminder from that. Next. So here we have See No Evil, and See No Evil is based off an occult object called a Hand of Glory. I've always been fascinated by the occult since I was a kid, so I thought that this piece would be a fun way to reference that and just explore different techniques. I am very happy with how this piece turned out. The base is a stone from a creek bed near my studio, so that was fun to go out and find. I also am very fond of the symbolism between this and Absolution that references the concept of the hanged man, which is a lot, but it's fun. Next. So here we have the ritual tree. The ritual tree was actually the second piece I created for this show, and I think that he's really where I found my footing for the work that I wanted to create. He is meant to embody this sense of playfulness, but also something that is, at its core, kind of unnerving. He is one of my favorite pieces. I had a wonderful time taking photos of him, and I really do think that he shines. He was inspired by my love of nature and the time that I spend out in the woods. Next. So here we have the Prince of Things Unseen, and the prince was a labor of love. He broke on the way over to the studio to be fired, and for a time I thought, oh man, I'm just gonna have to remake this thing from the beginning. But I decided no, I'm just going to put him in the kiln and see what happens. So he survived the kiln, albeit without his ears and several of his hair pieces. And I fixed him. I put him back together, and now he looks great. You can't really see it in these photos, but those two little pricks in his eyes are LED lights that I have wired through like the hollow cavity in his chest. They function and they look very, very cool in person in the gallery. He is meant to be a depiction of embracing your shadow side. He is not evil necessarily, but he is a manifestation of darker things. Next. And here we have Montero. Montero is named after the Lil Nas X song that I'm sure we are all somewhat familiar with at this point. And he was largely based off something I experienced when I was younger, which was when I was in middle school, a rumor went around that I was the Antichrist because people looked at me and assumed that I was gay. To be fair, they were correct. I was gay, but I didn't know at the time. And the ostracization I faced because of these rumors was deeply traumatizing. So with this piece, I wanted to comment on that, how as a queer child growing up in religious environments, you will be told that you are a monster or a demon before you even really know who you are. So with Montero, I wanted to create something that was a demon, yes, but you look at him and he's not evil per se, he's just a kid. Just like how in these environments, people thought of me as this monster, but I was just a child. Next. So here we have Let Not Your Heart Be Heavy. Let Not Your Heart Be Heavy is based off a dream that I had where I was swallowed by a catfish. And at first, I just thought, it'd be fun to make a piece based off this weird dream that I had. But as I worked on him, I realized that the catfish was a metaphor for the trauma that I was carrying in me. And in a way, I was letting it swallow me whole. So this piece is very dear to me because it speaks to reminding myself that it's okay to move on and it's okay to heal. And at the end of the dream, I escaped the mouth of the catfish. So I like to think that there is some symbolism in that. Next. So here we have Holy. Holy is probably the most intense work I did for this show. This piece took 4 months to complete, and he was easily the most challenging one. I considered just not finishing him several times because he was proving to be that difficult, but I'm glad that I stuck with him because he is meant to represent overcoming trials and taking pride in your identity as a magnificent angel with outspread wings. I am very, very proud of him. And if I'm being honest, photos do not do him justice. He is something to see in person. Next. So this last piece, the final piece in the narrative, are these two little ghosts named Nobodies. If you notice, these two, unlike the rest of my pieces, have no gold in them. I used gold to reference my time spent in religious education. And these two, lacking said gold, represent finding freedom outside of these religious environments. At their core, they represent healing and the fact that no matter how bad things are, in the end, you aren't alone. When I was going through and writing this talk and trying to figure out how to end it, I hit a stumbling block because I didn't know how. But then I thought of something that I did in the gallery. In the gallery, each of these pieces has a little plaque with some prose that I have written about them. I did not include these in this presentation because I believe that they are something that needs to be experienced in person. However, I could think of no better way to end this show than by reading off the piece that I wrote for these ghosts. And that is, and at the end of the world stood two specters, hand in hand, gazing as nothing and everything laid bare before them. And yet they were unafraid, for here at the end of time, they still had each other. Thank you.
You can go ahead and flip to that first slide. So this work is titled Morpheus. I went with this title because Morpheus is the Greek god of dreams and sleep. So I thought it was very fitting for the concepts that I wanted to present here. The definition of a dream is a series of thoughts, images, or emotions occurring during sleep. I think this is really interesting because dreams are how we process what we encounter in our waking hours, whether it be sights, smells, sounds, anything that we see in the daytime, at some point we will also encounter in sleep. I also think it's really beautiful because we always, everyone has dreams, whether you remember them in the morning or not, everybody has dreams. And I think especially something that I've noticed over the past year, as we've spent a lot more time apart, I feel like that is something in this work that we'll be able to bond over. This installation can be broken down into three parts. So firstly, I'd like to speak about the physical installation of the clouds. I chose to go with clouds because I really wanted to create kind of a dreamscape to kind of guide the viewer into their own kind of dreamland in which they can really evaluate their own experiences and what that means to them. I really like the concept of the viewer also being part of the work, which is why I pulled a lot of inspiration from Yayoi Kusama and Susani Park, specifically Yayoi Kusama's infinity rooms. They're spaces in which the viewer can go into and almost kind of melt into the work and really be surrounded. And I think that is something that can be really engaging and kind of really develop a new sense of what it means to be a part of sculpture. So that is something that I found really enticing to work with, because when you step into this installation, it's not just above you, it's not just in front of you, it's all around you. You can turn around 360 and see a new angle every time. And that was, one, difficult to work with, but also very inspiring. For the second section of my work, I went with a projection video. It's kind of difficult to see in the photos. Seth, you can go ahead and go to the next photo, but the video will be on my website, which I'll post later in the chat. But I had a lot of people who are very close to me send their favorite memories to me in video format. I also believe that our identity is found in those who we surround ourselves with. And so I really wanted to kind of encapsulate the idea of life flashing before your eyes in this projection. Just seeing all of these memories that these people had sent me really inspired me to continue this work, as it kind of reminded me why I started in kind of encapsulating the human experience through dreams. And finally, the audio portion, which you will be able to scan via QR code in the gallery, but also can be found on my website. I wanted to create a stimulating sound that could accompany but not retract from my work. And so it's mostly ambient sound, but it's also backed by theta waves. Theta waves are specifically a wavelength that is supposed to stimulate creativity and calmness in the mind, which I think can really speak to our experiences with dreams and how that reflects on processing our emotions and our experiences and how that brings us all together. Thank you.
I would like to start off by thanking my professors who throughout the years became my mentors and encouraged me, especially Professor Visser for taking me under her wing. I would also like to thank my capstone group for being strong, independent people who pushed each other throughout this entire experience. and most importantly, my family and friends for supporting me and inspiring me every day. Next slide, please. My exhibition is centered around COVID-19 and the resulting mandatory quarantine that has undoubtedly altered our relationship with our living spaces. No longer did we come home only to spend a small fraction of our day in our living space. We were now required to stay indoors and explore our relationship with our homes. Quarantine gave me a unique chance to reflect on our world. It allowed me to ask questions about my relationship with the spaces I live in. It allowed me to ask, what makes our house a home? What makes our space a place? I also reflected on what exactly gave society hope, what provided us with comfort, and what helped us not feel so alone. After careful consideration, I have narrowed it down to two components: communication and our beloved pets. A lot of my inspiration came from witnessing the unified reactions in society to COVID-19. Throughout the pandemic, many people, myself included, began to notice changes in their mental health. The CDC reported that researchers found the amount of adults with recent symptoms of an anxiety or depressive disorder increased from 36.4% to 41.5%, while the percentage of individuals reporting unmet mental health care needs increased from 9.2 to 11.7% between August 2020 and February 2021 due to the COVID-19 pandemic. It is important to note that there are other mental disorders that I may not note, but were taken into consideration while creating this project, as each of them impacted our personal experiences with COVID. The uncertainty, the isolation, the financial setbacks, and everything in between deeply affected us, our loved ones, and the people around us. At the same time, there was a boom in animal adoption rates. To put this in perspective, Austin Pets Alive, an animal shelter that innovated life-saving programs designed to save the animals most at risk of euthanasia, announced that in the month of April, 544 cats and 581 dogs were adopted from APA shelters. That's up to 70% and 60% respectively from their previous year. In a Wired article, the president and CEO of the Humane Society of the United States stated that the rates of fostering in particular had increased by 90% in some cities. Concentrating on the relationship between these two notions, I aim to connect with my audience through the moments and emotions people shared with their pets. Being at home with our pets allowed us to notice tender, human-like characteristics from them that we otherwise would not be around for. There's a different association with the word pet post-COVID. And I say post-COVID in the softest term, as we're not completely out of the mud yet. Nonetheless, no longer are they just animals inhabiting our home. They are now roommates that one constantly interacts with. For me, personally, the increase in quality time resulted in a stronger bond with my pets than ever before. Barks, whimpers, and even meows are no longer difficult to decipher. Each vocalization for my pets now effectively communicates a concrete meaning, prompting emotional reactions from me. I found comfort in knowing that I wasn't completely alone. I had a pet by my side that loves me unconditionally and was there to experience this moment in history with me. I am positive others experience this as well, so I commemorate this collective experience through my work. It serves to encapsulate that shared experience with our pets after partaking in social distancing and safety measures that led to a monumental amount of quality time spent with our animal companions. Next slide, please. This first piece is called COVID Baby and is very personal to me. A COVID baby is a term that has come to refer to a pet that was adopted during quarantine. Whether this new companion was adopted to counteract loneliness, to provide comfort, or even as an impulsive decision, the fact of the matter is that a COVID baby provided their parents with a sense of purpose. This work was inspired by a COVID baby of my own, an overly friendly golden retriever with a face you can hardly ever say no to. Spending every day with him since he was a small 3-month-old pup set a personal standard for the amount of attention he expected to receive on a daily basis. Normally, this would not be an issue. However, this manifested into a case of separation anxiety for my COVID baby. This feeling of separation anxiety is portrayed in my work through the expressive, pouting eyes on my sculpture. The angled chair, the scattered materials, and the cup full of water further exemplifies and even slightly implies that someone has just left her COVID baby all by himself and is now dealing with the inner turmoil of being left alone, even if it's for a short period of time. Next slide. Our pets were not the only ones left to deal with isolation. Oftentimes, we felt isolated from the world during quarantine. This isolation left us engulfed with a plethora of emotions. This next piece, A Faithful Companion, is an ode to my feline friend who served to ground me during my bouts with these emotions. The primary focus of this work is to bestow the viewer with a feeling of serenity, what I believe is exemplified by a curled up cat on the couch sleeping. I concentrated on maintaining earth tones as they tend to be perceived as warm, reassuring, and settling colors. The accompanying elements, the armchair, the Sherpa blanket, and throw pillow, serve to elevate that sense of serenity by being symbols of the comfort and ease we all longed for during the pandemic. Next slide, please. My final work, A Momentary Escape, showcases an individual walking out of their front door to enjoy a walk with their dog, an excuse to leave their living space for a fraction of a time. While this work as a whole has a title, as I began to work more closely with it, each subject took on a different form. As a whole, to me, it represents a brief breath of fresh air. I can look back to the beginning of the pandemic and vividly remember how much I cherished being able to go outside and feel the sun on my skin. For a little moment, it felt like everything was back to normal. But in a more profound way, this piece represents our soul. A living, breathing being with thoughts and emotions, isolated and withdrawn for human interaction. It represents how a lot of us struggled with defining ourselves and embracing our individuality during isolation. For so long, people have based themselves on what they have in common or not have in common with others. During quarantine, we had to define it for ourselves. And that started with a blank slate, the soul. The ambiguous human shape was created with the intention to represent difficulties that individuals went through during isolation with their identities, their mental stability, and their awareness of the self. Each day, although felt repetitive and never ending, came with a variety of emotions. I intend to showcase this throughout the course of this exhibition by changing the color of the figure as each day progresses. The hue will represent a different emotion, which will in turn affect the rest of the work as a whole, just as our emotions play a role in dictating how we perceive the world. These works, as a collective, were meant to serve as a form of self-reflection. They represent passive moments that we all may feel individually. So I challenge the audience to reflect on these works and view these passive experiences as positive memories. Let these small moments of empathy, serenity, and even freedom be a part of our collective memory of the COVID-19 pandemic and resulting quarantine. Thank you.